Hello, and welcome to Women's Voices presented by Drama Club. I am one of the co-presidents of the club, Megan Palmquist. It's no secret that 2020 has been a difficult year, but one of the incredible things we get to celebrate is the 100-year anniversary of women getting the right to vote. This is because of the work of incredible women like Susan B. Anthony, Alice Paul, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Ida B. Wells, and so many more that history is beginning to uncover and shed a light on. While we celebrate all the women who have fought for our right to vote, we must also take a moment to recognize the notorious Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who time and time again voted in the best interest of women and fought for equality at all levels of our government. RBG once said, "Fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you." With her spirit and legacy in mind, we continue forward to reflect on what womanhood means to us in 2020. Our first speaker is sophomore Olivia Schleper, performing a piece titled "Fear of the Feminine," about her own experience with internalized misogyny and realizations of what feminism actually is and should be.
When my family moved into our new house when I was in 3rd grade, and my sisters and I finally had our own rooms, my grandparents offered to buy each of us our brand new bedspreads, curtains, and wall colors. At that time, my favorite colors were blue, green, and aquamarine. All of my backpacks, pencil cases, and notebooks had to have a notable amount of some bright shade of green or blue to win my approval. I even remember picking out books at my school's library and book fair based on the colors of the cover rather than the actual content. So, naturally, I chose cyan and lime green to be the colors of my walls, my bedspread, and my curtains. I remember my parents asking me if maybe I would prefer something a little more neutral or toned down that I would still be happy with when I got older. I was adamant, though, and sat right with my grandma as she put in the order for my new room. One of my younger sisters decided to paint her room a light, muted blue with magenta curtains and a patterned bedspread. I was shocked by this and even a little annoyed. She was a girly girl. She always wanted pink everything and Barbies and fairies and unicorns and kittens and glitter, and it seemed to me that she was encroaching on my brand. I liked blue and green. I liked playing soccer and reading and dogs and getting scrapes and dirt on my knees. I was a fully self-diagnosed tomboy. At school, I was a good student, reading far above my grades reading level, getting positive feedback on my writing, doing well in math and science. I was right up there with the boys. And since I was up there with them, I needed to be like them. I only ever talked about what Harry Potter or Aragon or Percy Jackson book I had just read and scoffed at the girls in my class who wore Uggs and yoga pants to school and talked about boys. I needed to be taken seriously by my teachers and my peers, so I stripped myself of all of my femininity and then felt guilty when I enjoyed things like Starbucks pumpkin spice lattes. My biggest fear was being seen as a girly girl. I'm repainting my room this year. It's not going to be anything drastically opposite of that god-awful, blinding green and blue, but I want to make it a little softer, a little more feminine, if you will, but a femininity that matches me. I still feel the remnants of that fear of girliness, though. I have a weird aversion to rom-coms and Uggs, but now I'm not afraid to hide my love of Disney and makeup and nice clothes. It took me a while to realize, but feminism isn't about denying one's own femininity in order to be taken seriously within society and achieve equality, but rather about embracing it and knowing that femininity and success can coexist. It's not about making fun of other girls for being basic or liking cliches and being romantic, but rather about empowering them to enjoy or wear or be whatever they want without being any less worthy of respect or success. Even though I sometimes feel that urge to put other women down to make myself feel better, I just have to remind myself that we're all here fighting for the same thing that those wonderful women 100 years ago were fighting for, the ability to live in peace, love, and equality. Thank you.
Next, we have seniors Allegra Hoppe and Megan Palmquist. These two will be doing a comparison reading with excerpts of Crystal Eastman's 1920 speech titled "Now We Begin," and Emma Watson's "Gender Equality is Your Issue Too" speech.
Most women will agree that August 23rd, the day when the Tennessee legislature finally enacted the federal suffrage amendment, is a day to begin with, not a day to end with. Men are saying perhaps, thank God this everlasting woman's fight is over. But women, if I know them, are saying now, at last, we can begin.
Today, we are launching a campaign called He for She. I am reaching out to you because I need your help. We want to end gender inequality, and to do that, we need everyone to be involved.
In fighting for the right to vote, most women have tried to be either non-committal or thoroughly respectable on every other subject. Now they can say that what we were really after, and what they are after in common with all the rest of the struggling world, is freedom.
This is the first campaign of its kind at the UN. We want to try and galvanize as many men and boys as possible to be advocates for gender equality. And we don't just want to talk about it, but make sure it is tangible.
Freedom is a large word.
I was appointed 6 months ago, and the more I've spoken about feminism, the more I have realized that fighting for women's rights has too often become synonymous with man-hating. If there's one thing I know for certain, it is that this has to stop.
Women's freedom, in the feminist sense, can be fought for and conceivably won before the gates open into industrial democracy. On the other hand, women's freedom in the feminist sense is not inherent in the communist ideal. All feminists are familiar with the revolutionary leader who can't see the women's movement. What's the matter with women? My wife's all right, he says.
For the record, feminism, by definition, is the belief that men and women should have equal rights and opportunities. It is the theory of the political, economic, and social equality of the sexes.
What then is the matter with women? What is the problem of women's freedom? It seems to me to be this: how to arrange the world so that women can be human beings with a chance to exercise their infinitely varied gifts in infinitely varied ways instead of being destined by the accident of their sex to one field of activity, housework and child raising. And second, if and when they choose housework and child raising, to have that occupation recognized by the world as work, requiring a definite economic reward and not merely entitling the performer to be dependent on some man.
I started questioning gender-based assumptions when at 8 I was confused at being called bossy because I wanted to direct the plays we would put on for our parents, but the boys were not.
This is not the whole of feminism, of course, but it is enough to begin with. Oh, don't begin with economics, my friends often protest. Woman does not live by bread alone. What she needs, first of all, is a free soul. And I can agree that women will never be great until they achieve a certain emotional freedom, a strong, healthy egotism, and some on-personal sources of joy, that in this inner sense we cannot make women free by changing their economic status. What we can do, however, is create conditions of outward freedom in which a free woman's soul can be born and grow. It is these outward conditions with which an organized feminist movement must concern itself.
When at 14, I started being sexualized by certain elements of the press.
Freedom of choice in occupation and individual economic independence for women. How shall we approach this next feminist objective? First, by breaking down all remaining barriers, actual as well as legal, which make it difficult for women to enter or succeed in the various professions, as well to go on into business, to learn trades and to practice them, to join trade unions. Chief among these remaining barriers is inequality in pay. Here the ground is already broken. This is the easiest part of our program.
When at 15, my girlfriends started dropping out of their sports teams because they didn't want to appear muscly.
Second, we must institute a revolution in the early training and education of both boys and girls. It must be womanly as well as manly to earn your own living, to stand on your own feet. And it must be manly as well as womanly to know how to cook and sew and clean and take care of yourself in the ordinary exigencies of life.
When at 18, my male friends were unable to express their feelings.
A growing number of men admire the woman who has a job, and especially since the cost of living doubled, rather like the idea of their own wives contributing to the family income by outside work. And of course, for generations, there have been whole towns full of wives who are forced by the bitterest necessity to spend the same hours at the factory that their husbands spend.
I decided I was a feminist, and this seemed uncomplicated to me, but my recent research has shown me that feminism has become an unpopular word. Apparently, I am among the ranks of women whose expressions are seen as too strong, too aggressive, isolating, anti-men, and unattractive. Why is the word such an uncomfortable one?
How can we change the nature of man so that he will honorably share that work and responsibility and thus make the homemaking enterprise a song instead of a burden? Most assuredly not by laws or revolutionary decrees.
I am from Britain and think it is right that as a woman I am paid the same as my male counterparts. I think it is right that I should be able to make decisions about my own body. I think it is right that women be involved on my behalf in the policies and decision-making of my country. I think it is right that socially I am afforded the same respect as men. But sadly, I can say that there is no one country in the world where all women can expect to receive these rights.
Is there any such thing, then, as freedom of choice in occupation for women?
No country in the world can yet say they have achieved gender equality. These rights I consider to be human rights, but I am one of the lucky ones. My life is a sheer privilege because my parents didn't love me less because I was born a daughter. My school did not limit me because I was a girl. My mentors didn't assume I would go less far because I might give birth to a child one day. These influencers were the gender equality ambassadors that made me who I am today. They may not know it, but they are the inadvertent feminists who are changing the world today, and we need more of those. And if you still hate the word, it is not the word that is important, but the idea and the ambition behind it, because not all women have been afforded the same rights that I have. In fact, statistically, very few have been. In 1995, Hillary Clinton made a famous speech in Beijing about women's rights. Sadly, many of the things she wanted to change are still a reality today. But what stood out for me the most was that only 30% of her audience were male. How can we affect change in the world when only half of it is invited or feel welcome to participate in the conversation?
Perhaps we must cultivate or simulate a little of that highly prized helplessness ourselves. But fundamentally, it is a problem of education, of early training. We must bring up feminist sons.
Men, I would like to take this opportunity to extend your formal invitation. Gender equality is your issue too. Because to date, I've seen my father's role as a parent being valued less by society, despite my needing his presence as a child as much as my mother's. I've seen young men suffering from mental illness, unable to ask for help, for fear it would make them look less macho. In fact, in the UK, suicide is the biggest killer of men between 20 and 49 years of age, eclipsing road accidents, cancer, and coronary heart disease. I've seen men made fragile and insecure by a distorted sense of what constitutes male success. Men don't have the benefits of equality either. We don't often talk about men being imprisoned by gender stereotypes, but I can see that they are, and when they are free, things will change for women as a natural consequence.
And is not the family the inevitable economic unit and women's individual economic independence, at least during that period, out of the question? Is there any way of ensuring a woman's economic independence while child raising is her chosen occupation? Or must she sink into that dependent state from which, as we all know, is so difficult to rise again?
If men don't have to be aggressive in order to be accepted, women won't feel compelled to be submissive. If men don't have to control, women won't have to be controlled. Both men and women should feel free to be sensitive. Both men and women should feel free to be strong. It is time that we all perceive gender on a spectrum, not as two opposing sets of ideals. If we stop defining each other by what they are not, and start defining ourselves by what we are, we can all be freer, and this is what He for She is about. It's about freedom.
The feminist must have an answer to these questions, and she has. The immediate feminist program must include voluntary motherhood. Freedom of any kind for women is hardly worth considering unless it is assumed that they will know how to control the size of their families. Birth control is just as elementary and essential in our propaganda as equal pay. Women are to have children when they want them. That's the first thing.
I want men to take up this mantle so their daughters, sisters, and mothers can be free from prejudice, but also so that their sons have permission to be vulnerable and human too. Reclaim those parts of themselves they abandoned, and in doing so be a more true and complete version of themselves.
That ensures some freedom of occupational choice. Those who do not wish to be mothers will not have an undesired occupation thrust upon them by accident, and those who do wish to be mothers may choose in a general way how many years of their lives they will devote to the occupation of child raising.
You might be thinking, who is this Harry Potter girl, and what is she doing up on stage at the UN? It's a good question, and trust me, I've been asking myself the same thing. I don't know if I'm qualified to be here. All I know is that I care about this problem, and I want to make it better. And having seen what I've seen, and given the chance, I feel it is my duty to say something. English statesman Edmund Burke said, "All that is needed for the forces of evil to triumph is for enough good men and women to do nothing." In my nervousness for this speech and in my moments of doubt, I've told myself firmly, if not me, who? If not now, when? If you have similar doubts when opportunities are presented to you, I hope those words might be helpful.
That brings us to the fourth feature of our program, motherhood endowment. It seems that the only way we can keep mothers free, at least in a capitalist society, is by the establishment of a principle that the occupation of raising children is peculiarly and directly a service to society, and that the mother upon whom the necessity and privilege of performing this service naturally falls is entitled to an adequate economic reward from the political government.
Because the reality is that if we do nothing, it will take 75 years, or for me to be nearly 100, before women can expect to be paid the same as men for the same work. 15.5 million girls will be married in the next 16 years as children, and at current rates, it won't be until 2086 before all rural African girls will be able to receive a secondary education.
It is idle to talk of real economic independence for women unless this principle is accepted. But with a generous endowment of motherhood provided by legislation, with all laws against voluntary motherhood and education and its methods repealed, with the feminist ideal of education accepted in home and school, and with the special barriers removed in every field of human activity, there is no reason why women should not become almost a human thing.
If you believe in equality, you might be one of those inadvertent feminists I spoke of earlier.
It will be time enough then to consider whether she has a soul.
I'm inviting you to step forward, to be seen, to speak up, to be the he for she, and to ask yourself, if not me, who? If not now, when?
Thank you.
Senior Katie Wagner has prepared a piece for us entitled Definition. Enjoy.
You do not repress people that you are not afraid of. It's in the very language, that word repress. First definition on Merriam-Webster. 1A, to check by or as if by pressure, to curb. Example, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg entered Harvard Law School in 1956, one of only 8 women in the class of 500 men, the dean of the school criticized her and her fellow female students for taking up spots they could have given to men. Despite this attempt to repress or curb her aspirations, RBG continued on. She eventually transferred out, graduated from Columbia, and became the Supreme Court Justice and general badass we know and love her as today. 1B, to put down by force, to subdue. Example, November of 1910, suffragettes in England marched to the Parliament building in London, only to be met with a wall of police officers that vastly outnumbered them. 300 were arrested and 2 were killed on a day called Black Friday. Despite these attempts to repress them and subdue their voices, the English suffragettes continued to fight for the right to vote. They learned jujitsu. They used decoys to distract the police from their organizers. They laced floral arrangements on their stages with barbed wire to stop the police from storming their events. They responded to force with force of their own, and after a long battle, won the initial right to vote in 1918. 2A, to hold by self-control. Example, she should have kept her legs closed. She shouldn't have dressed in a skirt so short. She looked like she wanted it. She should have known better. Sexual assault is one of the few crimes where people think it is fine to blame the victims for the actions of the perpetrators. If someone is shot walking down a street in broad daylight, we do not question where they were walking to, or how fast they were walking, or if they set out to be a target in the first place. We do not blame them for the bullet entering their body, or at least we shouldn't. Despite this disparity, the image of the woman trying to ruin the life of the good man with the bright future permeates our discussion of sexual assault. It has become such a common idea that it seeks to have women repress themselves, spitting the same ugly sentences at each other because this is the rhetoric in our sexually puritanical society that hurts us the most. 2B, to prevent the natural or normal expression, activity, or development of. Example, I was 17 the first time a man told me he was afraid of me. It had something to do with my dark clothes, he said, or maybe it was the fact I never smiled. Maybe it was the way that I've walked. I've always walked fast. Every woman learns how to walk fast on a dark street or in a parking garage or in broad daylight. I've seen myself in too many Criminal Minds episodes to walk slow. Maybe in hindsight, it was the fact that I knew how to protect myself. Or maybe, he said, it was the fact that I did what I wanted to do. He meant none of this as a compliment, and I took it as such. I am not the only one of my sisters who has cut off parts of themselves that men deem unnatural. I am not the only one of my sisters who has repressed herself to make a man more comfortable beside me. 3, to exclude from consciousness. Example. Every empowered woman who created change with their blood, every victim, every struggle, every fight just to be called and treated as equals. We repress the war that we have known our entire lives due to our gender, and yes, it is a war. We let society call our progress enough and tell each other to carry keys between our fingers, to never set drinks down, that we can't have both a job and a family. We have forgotten that we are not obligated to be afraid, that we can also be feared. We have forgotten our power. We have forgotten the definition.
Excerpt from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's We Should All Be Feminists. Lizbet is currently doing an internship with Poder Fellows through Unidos Minnesota, the largest Latinx political organization in Minnesota. She's provided a link for eligible voters to register to vote as the 2020 election approaches.
I want to start out by highlighting some of the women who, when recognizing suffragettes, often get overlooked. These are the women of color who fought tirelessly for all women to have their voices heard. This does not nearly do them justice, but I wanted to offer recognition for the incredible work they did. Women such as Mary Church Terrell, Dr. Mabel Pinghuali, Zidkala Shah, Adelina Nina Otero Warren, and countless others who paved the way for women of color to have a say in our government, our lives, and our futures. As previously mentioned, I will be reading an excerpt from the book We Should All Be Feminists, a modified version of a TED Talk delivered by Adichie in 2012. Okoloma was one of my greatest childhood friends. He lived on my street and looked after me like a big brother. If I liked a boy, I would ask Okoloma's opinion. Okoloma was funny and intelligent and wore cowboy boots that were pointy at the tips. In December 2005, in a plane crash in southern Nigeria, Okoloma died. It is still hard for me to put into words how I felt. Okoloma was a person that I could argue with, laugh with, and truly talk to. He was also the first person to call me a feminist. I was about 14. We were at his house arguing, both of us bristling with half-baked knowledge from the books we had read. I don't remember what this particular argument was about, but I remember that as I argued and argued, Okoloma looked at me and said, "You know, you're a feminist." It was not a compliment. I could tell from his tone, the same tone with which a person would say, "You're a supporter of terrorism." I did not know exactly what this word feminist meant, and I did not want Okoloma to know that I didn't know, so I brushed it aside and continued to argue. The first thing I planned to do when I got home was look up the word in the dictionary. Now fast forward to some years later, in 2003, I wrote a novel called Purple Hibiscus, about a man who, among other things, beats his wife and whose story doesn't end too well. While I was promoting the novel in Nigeria, a journalist, a nice, well-meaning man, told me he wanted to advise me. He told me that people were saying my novel was feminist, and his advice to me, he was shaking his head sadly as he spoke, was that I should never call myself a feminist, since feminists are women who are unhappy because they cannot find husbands. So, I decided to call myself a happy feminist. Thank you.
This has been Women's Voices presented by Drama Club. Thank you for listening to our stories, and please feel free to engage with us in a deeper conversation regarding this material on Instagram at csb.sju drama club after this program. Have a great day.